Hi folks, Florida Man here. Today I'm going over a game I recently played on the classic map as Russia on Play Diplomacy. The game was called Railin and Roadin. In spring 1901, I began the game by making contact with every other power on the map. I don't want to be arrogant and ignore anyone who's going to end up being important later. Unfortunately, not everyone shared my feelings. England did not respond to my spring messaging at all. France was much more communicative, and he reported the same problem with England that I was having. Maybe he had decided to try to play gunboat, because Germany likewise told me he wasn't hearing from England. Italy was fairly responsive, though we were both fairly non-committal in spring to any particular strategies. Austria and I had some exchanges in which we mutually pledged to keep out of Galicia, which is something either Russia or Austria should probably maintain a healthy skepticism about. Turkey and I planned the usual, almost obligatory, Black Sea bounce, although he was surprisingly quiet with me for most of spring, necessitating a follow-up message from me to make sure he was still playing. The silence felt ominous, especially since I already felt I had some reason to distrust Austria. It was a quiet game overall, but I resolved not to be taken by surprise by anyone. Italy was sort of warning me about Austria, which was interesting. He found Austria sycophantic, and he told me something more interesting. Austria wanted Trieste and Venice DMZ'd. This made me a bit more suspicious of Austria, although I was frankly already planning to attack him. When orders process, you see I moved to Galicia, and I actually landed there, meaning I was theoretically the untrustworthy one, not Austria. And elsewhere I opened north, because Germany seemed sort of friendly, while England was completely silent. Turkey made a pretty standard opening, which I was happy with since he wasn't in Armenia. Austria decided to open to Romania, Budapest, and Albania, however, which meant I would have to play a guessing game to figure out if I'd be able to take Romania or if he'd support it, as well as whether he'd try to bounce my possible move to Vienna and whether Turkey would help him or me. So Austria was not so friendly as the absence of a unit bouncing me in Galicia might suggest. Germany added another wrinkle to this rather unusual opening situation, opening to Tyrolia. If this was a pro-Austrian move, as I began immediately to suspect, it was an excellent maneuver. Since Austria had vacated Venice, this would enable the Austrian-German alliance to secure all the Austrian centers against whatever attack I might try. So Germany and Austria seemed hostile to me and allied with each other, and I would have to try to make sure Turkey and Italy took my side. In fall, the original England, who had never responded to my first message, surrendered, and he was quickly replaced by a much more talkative English player. I had an immediate positive impression of this player, and I became interested in working with him in the West over France and Germany. I think England can be an excellent partner for Russia in keeping the West in chaos and keeping France and Germany contained. Germany had actually not said much of anything to me, and he didn't change that this season. In fact, Germany had only sent me a single message in spring, so although initially I was hoping to work with France and Germany against the original, silent, English player, I now began working to convince France that we should turn on Germany instead. To the south, I kept up a friendly dialogue with Italy, which was pretty innocuous on the whole. Austria and I had a dialogue in which he claimed he wasn't going to Romania, he just forgot to change his orders in spring. He was trying to smooth things over with me, and I felt this was a good moment to confront him about the rumor that was going around that he was trying to get together a coalition against me. Austria immediately responded that it was the first he had heard of this, and he speculated it was Italy spreading the rumor because he thought Italy was inexperienced and was lying, just because he thought you were supposed to lie a lot in diplomacy. I said I would neither confirm nor deny that Italy was the source, and I agreed to go for Romania, while he said he would move Romania to Serbia. The intelligence regarding Austria trying to get a coalition together against me actually came from France, and what I took from this is that Austria was likely talking about going after me, with more than one person, which is why he couldn't pinpoint who might have said that to me. I was happy to let him believe it was Italy, though, since that would make it less likely they would work together effectively. My communications with Turkey were much more fruitful and straightforward than my dialogue with Austria. Turkey congratulated me on taking Galicia, and said he was considering trying to slip into Serbia or Greece, and I asked him to support me into Romania instead. He agreed. Straightforward, just the quality I like in an ally. When fall 1901 orders processed, I took Romania with Turkey's support, but the Austrian orders were not as advertised. He moved Budapest to Vienna, in what I was fairly certain was a coordinated bounce with Germany's move of Tyrolia to Vienna, and he did not vacate Romania as he had promised. He simply held in place to force me to dislodge him, so that if Turkey moved to Serbia instead of supporting me in, I would have to either support myself in with Sevastopol or lose the Black Sea to Turkey. I still supported myself in with Sevastopol since I wasn't sure what Austria would do, and Turkey did move into the Black Sea, but I was still somewhat comfortable with this result, since Turkey had just shown himself to be at least somewhat friendly. To the north, Germany bounced me out of Sweden, confirming he was on the Austrian side. I moved an army into Finland to help ensure I could take Sweden next year. However, this game was clearly off to a rocky start for me. I'm normally a pretty unstoppable Russia. Looking further west, England bounced Germany out of Holland, keeping him to one build, while France moved from the Channel into Belgium and from Spain into Portugal. France bounced Italy and Marseille as well, allowing him to get 2 builds without losing any ground to Italy. I think this is a really strong beginning for the French player, as well as a strong opening for Austria, who got his 2 builds and even persuaded Turkey into the Black Sea somehow, despite Turkey supporting me into Romania. In the build phase, I was very focused on the west. My only communications were with France and England. I told France I was pretty sure the German and Austrian moves showed a central triple, which made it imperative that France, England, and I join forces and remain united. France agreed with the understanding that we would split England between us after the fall of Germany. To England, I sent a friendly message basically reaffirming our alliance against Germany and requesting support into Sweden in spring 1902. When builds processed, we see I acquired an army in Warsaw because I was primarily worried about Germany and Austria, Turkey built an army in Smyrna for some reason, and Austria built 2 armies, showing the Austrian player was worried mainly about me. Germany built an army in Berlin, which seemed to show concern about me as well. It was beginning to look like I had a target painted on my forehead. Italy built Fleet Naples, while France made build choices that actually looked okay for me. Army Paris, Fleet Marseille. One to go after Germany, one to go after Italy, hopefully. England built a fleet in Edinburgh, but he had told me that he was doing that, so it didn't worry me so much. In spring 1902, original recipe Germany surrendered. Fortunately, he was immediately replaced. The new Germany resumed communications with the Russian Empire, which had previously been severed, and he apologized for the aggressive behavior of his predecessor. He pledged to keep out of my way in Sweden and support me if I wished to further expand into Norway. I thanked him for the genteel message, but I was non-committal since I was hoping to retain my alliance with England for now. In my messages with England and France, I continued encouraging their collaboration. I did explore with France whether we might want to flip and join up with Germany, but we ended up agreeing Germany would be a long-term threat if we didn't clip his wings now. Further south, Italy messaged me, but I felt as if he was just fishing for information about my relationship with Turkey, or friction between me and Turkey, so I avoided responding to that for now. Austria also sent me a message pretending there was nothing wrong between us, so I responded in kind, suggesting some orders he could make that would allow me to work with him to take Turkey out. Austria didn't respond to this, and I didn't get my hopes up for cooperation. With Turkey, I tried to discuss the Black Sea move directly, and he claimed he was worried Austria and I would suddenly begin working together and encouraged me to advance into Galicia. Since I really didn't think either of them was sincere about wanting to work with me, but moving into Galicia just made sense regardless, I tried to do just that. However, when spring 1902 orders processed, Austria bounced my move into Galicia, and Turkey took Austrian support into Romania. This wasn't surprising, but that didn't mean it wasn't devastating. Suddenly, it was clear I was absolutely the odd man out in the east. On the bright side, Germany made a move of Tyrolia to Venice, which bounced because Italy did not move. This seemed to me to suggest that there was some division in what had seemed like it might be a central triple. So Italy was a potential ally. In the north, my moves were much more successful. I landed in Sweden and Baltic Sea, so now I was positioned to help England against Germany. France also supported England convoying into Holland. The only worry in that region for me was that England, feeling secure in his alliance with France, might decide I was an easy target and attack my empty center of St. Petersburg. If that happened, I would certainly take St. Petersburg back, but it would slow me down at a critical moment. The other interesting thing was that Italy was still in Piedmont, but this time he didn't bounce France moving into Marseille. Since France also took Spain this season, he now had to choose what to do with the unit in Marseille. Is he going to vacate Marseille so he can try to build another unit there to go after Italy, or is he going to stay in Marseille? Alternatively, he could try some kind of scheme using several of his units to try and coordinate a bounce in Marseille while leaving it vacant. However, if Italy predicts his moves, he can screw them up by entering a support order with Piedmont so that Marseille ends up occupied anyway. The question is what France will build if he doesn't get to build in Marseille. He really needs another fleet to go after Italy, but if he doesn't get to vacate Marseille, he has to choose between a fleet built in Brest that might antagonize England, or an army in Paris that might end up being useless. After the spring, I was trying to bargain with Turkey and win him back. I offered to let him keep Romania if he would join me against Austria, which I think was quite generous. Turkey's response was polite, but he was clearly uninterested for the moment. I retreated to Ukraine and began plotting my moves for the fall. I had hoped to offer support into Denmark to England, but after my losses in the south, I decided I would take that for myself. Germany was certainly unlikely to stop me. I didn't say anything to England about this either way. I made no promises, and I also gave no warnings. It's better to ask for forgiveness than permission, after all. So I exchanged no messages with England, but interestingly, France asked me what my plans were with Denmark this season, and I told him frankly what I was doing and why. When fall 1902 orders processed, we see I succeeded in taking Denmark, France advanced into Ruhr, and England put a unit in Skagerrak. I found that latter move a little threatening, although I recognized it might be because he had anticipated he would be attacking Denmark next season. In the south, I knew I was going to lose Sevastopol, and I had decided to force my way into Galicia if I could, instead of trying to fight over Sevastopol. I'd be better off focusing on Austria over Turkey if I had to choose, because there was more exposed territory for me to attack there, and I could defend Moscow from Turkey without much effort for now. Interestingly, though, when Turkey convoyed out of Bulgaria, Austria walked into Bulgaria and Aegean Sea, which seemed like a pretty significant threat against the Turkish homeland. On reflection, the Bulgaria move at least looked arranged, since Turkey could have moved Armenia to Sevastopol instead of vacating Bulgaria if he wanted to keep that center. France moved Spain to Marseille and Portugal to Spain. Italy almost seemed to fail to enter orders, but then I realized that Piedmont and Venice had actually supported themselves to hold. Following the fall orders, I messaged England to explain myself about the Denmark move, and offered support to help him take other German centers. Unfortunately, England frankly told me he might need to take Denmark from me sometime in the next few years. He also declined the invitation I had extended to begin moving back from our shared border in Scandinavia. I knew my position was relatively delicate, so for now I agreed that if it was a few years away, I would understand about England wanting to take Denmark. I raised no objection regarding the Scandinavian units. In the south, my situation had continued to deteriorate, so I had to get creative and a little more aggressive diplomatically. I sent Austria a congratulatory message about his continued success against me and his moves against Turkey. I was actually fishing for information about what had happened. Austria claimed that the move into Aegean Sea was a mistake. He was expecting to bounce with Italy, but Italy didn't seem to know what to do with his fleets. By implication, the move to Bulgaria was with Turkish consent, which was unfortunate. Turkey implied in his messages to me that both moves were without his approval. However, he claimed he would seek an explanation from Austria. The southern front continued, in short, to be very frustrating. It felt like the walls were closing in around me now. I was on borrowed time in the north, and actively losing ground in the south. In my desperate situation, I had some rather forceful words for Italy. I called him out for having no committed allies or enemies, despite the first 2 years having passed. I compared him to Switzerland, and I said he needed to go for Adriatic Sea and attack Austria along with me, or he would get left behind. Unfortunately, he was extremely non-committal and exaggerated the difficulty of either himself or me going after Austria. I admit it was going to be difficult for me, mainly because it seemed he wasn't going to help. The Italian player was a very committed fence-sitter, it seemed. Following the builds, I had a new army in Moscow, naturally, since I was only being attacked from the south. Austria got a new army in Vienna, consistent with his continued alliance with Turkey. Turkey got a new fleet in Smyrna, which at least couldn't be used against me. This should have been a motivation for Italy to seek a firm alliance with me, but I wasn't holding my breath. France and England got new armies, which made sense given they were both still fighting Germany. In spring 1903, I completely focused my diplomacy on ensuring the stability of my northern possessions. I was fishing for any signs of danger from England in my messaging with France, and he reassured me. And I was reassuring England that he would have my continued support against the Germans. When orders processed, you see I used Sweden to tap Norway in case that unit either supported an attack on Denmark or tried to slide into St. Petersburg. I also supported England into Perygl and Bight, which was consistent with the understanding I had with England. In the south, you see I'm just playing defense against Austria and Turkey, mainly focusing on Austria by supporting myself to hold in Galicia. I tried to bounce in Ukraine, but Turkey supported himself in as I knew he probably would. This would now surely be a game of me falling back, trying to stay alive, and waiting for a chance to reconstitute the collapsing Russian Empire. My neighbors were continuing to do well. Turkey advanced into Ukraine, he self-bounced in Constantinople to protect that center from Austria, and he successfully got Austria to withdraw from both Aegean Sea and Bulgaria. Austria, on the other hand, successfully took Venice from Italy, which suggested the Austro-Turkish alliance was proceeding so successfully that they felt they could afford to worry about someone other than me. Again, this should have been the trigger for Italy to begin trying to coordinate with me, but he made no outreach, and given his previous responses, I didn't reach out to him. Italy had tried to support Venice to hold, by the way, but he had alienated France so thoroughly that France tapped Piedmont and cut that support this time. This shows the hazards of the Italian approach here. You make no friends, and you gradually alienate everyone. You cannot be Switzerland. In fall 1903, original recipe France surrendered, but as with original Germany, he was immediately replaced. England requested my support again, this time for a convoy into Kiel. I negotiated a withdrawal from Norway in exchange for this. When fall orders processed, you see, I followed through on my offered support. But England, unfortunately, did not withdraw from Norway as expected. You see, I didn't really trust him. I vacated Sweden because I wanted to be able to kick him out of St. Pete in case that was where he went this season. Unfortunately, with England in Kiel and France in Munich, I suspected that my days as an important English ally might be numbered. In the south, I managed to avoid losing anything important. I gave up Galicia, but in exchange I moved into Ukraine, which basically turned the southern moves into a big game of musical chairs for me. Italy somehow made what I would consider the worst of all possible decisions in his situation, allowing himself to be turned on France instead of trying to defend against the Austro-Turkish alliance. At the same time, France vacated Marseille, moving into Gulf of Lyon, so you can guess what's going to happen next. I chose not to call out the treacherous English for their decision to stay in Norway, and instead I now focused my only diplomatic efforts on the new French player. I explained to him what had happened with England, expressed that his predecessor and I had enjoyed a mutually beneficial and trusting relationship, and suggested a joint venture against England. I suggested that if he waited on fighting England until after I was gone, he would be much less effective at fighting the now nearly invincible corner power. When the builds proceeded, we see France actually didn't enter a build, which might explain why he didn't respond to my message during the build phase. He wasn't paying any attention to the game just then, I guess. Turkey built a fleet in Smyrna and an army in Ankara, so still more focused on Italy and me rather than on Austria. Italy destroyed his Tuscany army, further committing to fighting France instead of defending his homeland. In the spring 1904 negotiations, I had some conversations with the French player, but unfortunately it was plain to see that he was very inexperienced. The biggest giveaway was that he didn't really understand how the game pieces moved. For instance, he warned that England was going to attack me in Denmark, and he suggested I should tap Perygl and Bight to cut support for that attack. Of course, any experienced diplomacy player will know that a unit cannot cut support for an attack against itself. On the bright side, France revealed he did have a plan to take Kiel from England, with German support. The other message I sent was to Turkey, basically arguing that he was growing at a snail's pace, and if he had worked with me, he would have expanded much more quickly, and other arguments basically in that vein. Turkey didn't bother responding. When orders processed, you see I lost Denmark, while France's planned attack on England did not go as expected. Instead of getting support from Germany, Germany actually tapped Munich and cut the support France had entered for himself. It was apparent to me that this was going to be a somewhat incompetently waged war on France's part. On the bright side, I retook Sevastopol from Turkey due to some bad orders on Turkey's part. This wasn't going to be permanent necessarily, but it slowed the Austrian-Turkish alliance down again, and it made me look relevant again. Because diplomacy is a game of negotiations and strategy, as much as it is about tactics and actual strength, your apparent position can matter just as much as your actual military power on a short-term basis. In other interesting news, Austria was now in Rome, while Turkey was in the Ionian Sea, and Italy was out of position to defend Naples from him or Austria, showing Italy was likely on a slippery slope to destruction. On the other hand, Italy did successfully dislodge the French fleet in Gulf of Lyon. forcing France to retreat to Spain, which was actually an improvement in the French defensive position in some sense, since now Italy would have a slightly harder time attacking Spain. In the fall 1904 negotiations, I used the French decision to go after England as leverage to try and persuade England to give up Denmark. I had to sell England on both the idea that he would be really doomed if I worked with France against him, and that I wasn't going to disappear, that I would get one of my southern neighbors to flip on the other, but I felt that given how much persuasion I used, I had probably succeeded here. People who have an in-depth discussion about something are often more invested in the result of that discussion than people who agree to things more easily. In my messages with France, he wanted advice on what type of thinker England was. He was trying to figure out if England would cut a convoy that France was thinking he would do into Wales. So I had to explain to France that cutting a convoy isn't really a good way of describing what could happen. England would need to dislodge his fleet in this situation to stop France's convoy, and England wasn't positioned to do that, so a convoy to Wales was guaranteed to succeed. At the same time, in the south, I tried to sell Austria on the idea that he would be better off turning on the Turk than continuing to work against me. I pointed out how slow their progress was, and I pointed out that a slowly expanding Turkey behind him for the whole game would be a constant source of danger, while I myself would always be hovering to the north, waiting for any sign of weakness. Austria was clearly unconvinced, but I thought there was a seed of interest planted there. I think the Austrian player was impressed with my willingness to push that kind of a message here. Confidence is powerful. When fall 1904 orders processed, we see I'm in real trouble. England was lying to me, which wasn't terribly surprising, but the result of it is a pretty big problem. I'm in Norway, but he's in Denmark, in St. Petersburg. Not only that, but France's frankly somewhat incompetent defense left England in possession of Belgium and Germany in possession of Munich, thanks to English support. France was just lucky that he defended Spain well enough to retain it, while Italy lost everything except Tunis to the enemies he'd been helping. In the east, I retained Warsaw, which allowed me to retain somewhat defensible for a bit longer. I lost Sevastopol, but on the bright side, Turkey made another defensive mistake. He moved up into Ukraine and left Romania open. So in the retreat phase, I take Romania. It turned a moment that would have been a small loss into a triumph, where Turkey has every reason now to feel as if he hasn't made any meaningful progress against me since 1902. In the build phase, we see Austria get a new army in Trieste, Turkey and I each remain constant thanks to his mistake, France destroys his army in Marseille, Germany gets a new army in Berlin, as you would expect after retaking Munich, and England built a fleet in Liverpool, an army in London. A strong combination for purposes of defending the island from France, I think. Italy chose to destroy the units that couldn't help defend his last center of Tunis. In spring 1905, having planted my seeds with both Austria and Turkey, there wasn't much negotiation to be had there. With France embroiled in conflict with England but unable to help me, and England thoroughly untrustworthy, I didn't bother talking to any of them. When orders process, you see I lost Romania, Moscow, and Warsaw, retaking St. Pete from England instead of trying to defend my very divided eastern centers. I'm in a well-fortified position for now, as long as England doesn't start working with Turkey and Austria. At the same time, Germany attacks and takes Kiel from England, which I can only assume was with English permission. It makes sense to assume Germany would do this, so the fact that England very clearly didn't even try to defend it strongly suggests that England was okay with losing that center. France also fled from Wales back to Brest, giving up his only success of the last year. In the Mediterranean, Turkey positioned to take Tunis from Italy. Going to fall 1905, original Austria surrendered. Within just over 2 hours, he was replaced. The new Austria sent me a quick message, and I pushed the idea that Turkey was going to solidify his position and come after him, and suggested he help me restore my homeland, and I would help him crush Turkey. I pushed similar messaging in my dialogue with Turkey. Both of them were somewhat receptive. I tried to get newly resurrected Germany to support me back into Denmark, but he said he had to protect his home centers this season. Understandable. When fall 1905 orders had processed, we see that my diplomatic efforts were successful. I recaptured Warsaw with Turkey's support, while Austria pulled the trigger on attacking Turkey by moving into Naples and Bulgaria. It looked like the beginning of my comeback. In the west, on the other hand, the tides began to turn against England. France took Belgium, while Germany successfully retained Kiel and protected Berlin. All in all, this was a very good season for me. After the fall, Austria was very interested in working together, and I was agreeable to that idea. I wanted to make sure Austria thought of me as a friend at this point because he was still in position to retake Warsaw if I wasn't careful. Of course, I was saying the same things to Turkey. In the build phase, we see England had to destroy 3 units, and Germany constructed a new fleet to go after England, so England is clearly in a bad place now, and Austria got a couple of new armies. During spring 1906 negotiations, our first replacement France surrendered, and he was replaced, then the second replacement surrendered, and he was replaced. England proposed that he and I have a ceasefire so he could focus on France. I proposed a DMZ of Norwegian Sea and Skagerrak, and he agreed. Turkey was seeking my tactical advice and planning his defense against Austria with me, which was very informative on my side. I had a decent idea from both Austria and Turkey, as a result of communication with both of them, of what they were each doing. So in spring 1906 orders process, we see the resurrection of the Russian Empire continue to proceed. I retake Moscow while Turkey vacated Moscow to focus on the south. In fairness to Turkey, he had no choice but to focus on Austria right now. Austria was doing very well in conquering him. This season he takes Romania and shores up his defense of Italy. England was clearly in deep trouble and unlikely to be able to threaten me again anytime soon. It was a good season for me, but now Austria was doing so well that I was more worried about him than about Turkey. I told Turkey that it was an important priority for me to retake my home centers, but I was willing to vacate Moscow for now in order to assist in the war effort. At the same time, I sent a message to Austria requesting a coordinated bounce in Warsaw. Unfortunately, Austria didn't respond, and I ended up actually landing in Warsaw, consistent with the narrative I was giving Turkey, but not consistent with my continued regeneration. The war against Austria was going so poorly for Turkey that I was genuinely somewhat glad that I decided to make the move, though. I didn't want a dominant Austria. In the West, we see there's a bunch of chaos. France somehow let England continue to occupy Marseille, Germany seemingly tried to invade France, and France moved a unit into the Turanian Sea for some reason. In the build phase, it becomes even more apparent that Austria is going to be a massive threat to me if I start helping him against Turkey instead of vice versa. He got yet another army for a total of 9. Germany got another fleet, which I was hopeful meant he was planning to continue attacking England. In spring 1907, Austria was very suspicious of me. He took my decision to vacate Moscow as a declaration of war, which frankly it was. I was committed to Turkey for now. In the West, Germany began reaching out to me again. He said, "Hi there, what about you help me into Den this year so I can take on England and relieve you from that front so you can focus on you other front with Turkey/Austria." I laughed when I read that, because it was him trying to get something for nothing from my perspective. Also because of spelling and grammatical errors. I replied, "Hi Germany, I am already feeling pretty safe from England, and I'm frankly at my most secure from all Western threats, for as long as the three of you are fighting each other. However, if you're willing to support me into Denmark, I'll happily rejoin the fight on your side." Germany eventually agreed to do this. At the same time, I was proposing a joint effort with England against Germany, but England and I didn't reach any conclusion before orders processed, so it was an easy decision to go with the German opportunity. When orders processed, we see that I continued to help Turkey against Austria in the east, and we scored our first victories. Austria was putting units into the useless effort of surrounding Warsaw to try and take it, and Turkey slipped into the resulting gaps in his defenses and took Romania and Greece. To the west, we see that England had clearly begun helping France against Germany. The balance of alliances in the west had shifted again. Most importantly, it shook out to my benefit again. Germany supported me into Denmark, while my fleet from Norway moved into Skagerrak, and Germany and England bounced in Baltic Sea, resulting in England having no possible retreat for Denmark except to Helgoland Bight. England tried to retreat to Baltic Sea instead, resulting in the destruction of the fleet. Now we come to a pivotal moment in the game from my perspective, fall 1907. This is one of my finest moments as a diplomat, where despite all the hits I've taken and all the stabs I've recently delivered, literally everyone around me is trying to work with me. England messaged me seeking peace, and after I sent my reply, England eagerly agreed to cede Denmark to me in exchange for my help against Germany. As you know, Germany had just given me support to take Denmark in order to salvage his position against England. Unfortunately for Germany, he was attacked by France at the same time, although the English player professed that he didn't really want to rely on France as an ally. To the south, Austria had been repeatedly asking me to join him against Turkey, although the moves he made this past season suggest he wrongly thought Turkey was no longer a threat when he entered his orders. Why else would he feel free to suddenly join the attack on Germany alongside France and England? That was the explanation he gave for the move to Bohemia in spring. Turkey, on the other hand, has his eyes genuinely on the prize, and he's landed a hammer blow against Austria right when the Austrian player had his back turned. He accepts it when I suggest now would be a good time for me to retake Moscow. Once orders process, you see things went just as planned for me this season. Russia finally controls Moscow again, along with Denmark, and I kept Warsaw free for a build as well. I also managed to achieve the key goal of moving in a way that will allow everyone who wants to believe that I'm on their side to continue convincing themselves of that. This posture of strategic ambiguity is one that I strive to maintain in key moments in many of my successful games of diplomacy, as well as some of my unsuccessful ones. If people think you're on their side, they can't tell what you're thinking, and they have no evidence to refute their misconception, it gives you a great temporary window of safety from which to plan and launch your next big attack. In the fall 1907 retreat phase, I remained active, talking to Germany and suggesting he retreat toward Austria and work with me against the Austrians. I figured he wouldn't tell Austria about this, since Austria just attacked him. I also sent a message of encouragement to Austria, so he knew I was still friendly, and I implied that my move into Moscow was not by Turkish consent. I was still thinking about possibly working with Austria, especially if he continued to make mistakes that would result in a stronger Turkey. I generally prefer the Juggernaut, but this Austrian player seemed a little weaker than the Turkish player, and I expected I might have an easier time controlling him. In the builds, I got 2 new armies, in Warsaw and St. Petersburg, while France built a Paris army. Germany retained his units in Ruhr and Tyrolia as I'd been hoping, Austria destroyed his Silesia unit, and Turkey built a Smyrna army. In spring 1908, the 3rd replacement France surrendered and was replaced. Unfortunately, at this point in the game, I was having a lot of trouble keeping my strategic ambiguity position. I was willing to help Austria by giving him information about Turkey's plans and making moves that only seemed helpful to Turkey. For instance, Turkey wanted me to cut support from Galicia this season, and I told Austria about this and suggested that he support Romania from Budapest instead, but Austria wanted me to begin making moves that were very overtly in his favor. Turkey was paying less attention to the game, so it wasn't as much of an issue to keep him invested in his alliance with me even without very direct support on my end. England was very active in communicating with me this season. He was hoping I would help him get into Kiel. I was thinking about how I might be able to keep England and myself on reasonably good terms while he fought with France, so I was at least considering this. We discussed that I could move for Kiel in spring, then vacate and take Berlin in fall. I told Austria about this, and we discussed that he could bounce me in Kiel in the spring, and then support me in Kiel in the fall, so I wouldn't have to hand it over to England. When orders processed, we see that Austria did in fact bounce me in Kiel as planned. I also moved into Prussia, so I could possibly go for Berlin, and I moved into Sevastopol and Norwegian Sea. At the same time, France regained full control of his homeland again, and took Tunis from the Italian player, Turkey took Aegean Sea, and Germany walked into Trieste. In the aftermath of this, though, during fall 1908 negotiations, Austria was definitely more mistrustful of me, since I wasn't defending against Turkey at all, and I actually moved into Galicia, although I had told him I was doing that. England actually seemed a lot less suspicious of me, and all he needed was a little reassurance that my fleet in Norwegian Sea wasn't going to Edinburgh, but was destined to go after France, which was a ridiculous pledge, but he seemed to believe it. Turkey requested my support into Romania, so I knew the moment was coming when I would have to declare my support for one or the other of my 2 southern neighbors unambiguously. Also in fall 1908, the 4th replacement France surrendered and was replaced. He and I immediately discussed a joint attack on England. When fall orders processed, we see I convoyed into Edinburgh, England and I bounced in Kiel, and Austria bounced with me in Berlin. Austria was supposed to support me into Kiel in the fall, so I supposed he recognized that I was his enemy and decided to treat me as such. I supported Turkey into Romania, so my allegiance was declared, and Italy finally died. At this point, the 1st replacement England also surrendered. Following these developments, France and I negotiated the builds. We both agreed that there was no need for more fleets in the northern waters. However, at some point in that conversation, England was replaced, and France decided to put a new fleet in Brest. That may have been a necessary move on his part strategically, so that he would be less vulnerable to England, slipping into mid-Atlantic Ocean and walking into Iberia. As far as I was concerned, though, this decision was likely to throw off the delicate balance of power between the French and myself in the West, because France could pull his other fleets back north anytime he wanted and outnumber my single fleet in the region. So this caused me to take a second look at who I should work with in the West. During spring 1909 negotiations, I proposed to the New England that he fight France with me, and in exchange I wouldn't expand my control over his island. I had enjoyed having an alliance with France for the time it lasted, but I was looking to the long term, and I considered that France would become a pretty big threat to me once he brought his other fleets back around to the front with England, especially since he already had more armies available to fight on the front in Germany than I did. I made similar overtures to Germany. I was hoping to use both of them as human shields and keep France occupied against them, while Turkey and I defeated Austria and consolidated the East. When orders processed, I moved into Liverpool since England hadn't responded to my overture. I also swept most of my armies south toward Austria. Germany attacked Austria to retake Munich, and England and France traded Holland and Belgium. Unfortunately, this is also the moment when France began assisting Austria. To start with, he convoyed Naples to Albania and moved into Tyrolia. I was convinced France was setting up an attack on Austria once Austria had most of his forces focused on the fight with me and Turkey. This was all setting off warning signs for me that my rather surprisingly strong position might be in danger. Still, in fall, I accepted French support into Munich, because I didn't expect I would have his support anytime in the future. Unfortunately for me, the other moves gave away that England was clearly going to be on France's side for the foreseeable future. England tried to move into Norway and supported France into Kiel. At this point, trust between myself and France had clearly begun to break down. A pattern emerged of France trying to support Austria against Turkey and myself, France and I grappling in the west, and France and myself each trying to persuade the other to switch sides in the east. There are little events that break this up. The main thing is when there are surrenders and replacements of surrendered players. In fall 1910, the second replacement England surrendered and was replaced. In spring 1911, Turkey surrendered and was replaced. In related news, the second replacement England surrendered. Austria, Turkey, and France began pushing a 4-power draw at this point. I was unwilling to accept this draw, because after all the effort I'd put in, I was still hoping I could pull out a win. I'm generally not very incentivized to accept draws on play diplomacy, because unlike other sites where I play diplomacy, it has a ranking system that actually means something. Draws don't do much for my rating, so there's very little difference for me between a draw and a loss at this point, unless it's a 2-power draw or a draw with other high-ranking players. In order to avoid turning everyone against me, I pretended to accept the draws. It was secret ballot, so no one had any way of checking. After some back and forth with the draw proposals, a New England joined. Then that New England surrendered and was replaced. I should note that at some point, I did actually accept one of these draws. It was one proposed by Turkey that would exclude him, so it was a 3-power draw. And I had the thought that maybe it was going to be the best I could do, and the game might go on for a very long time, so at least that would be acceptable. Unfortunately, despite my reluctance to accept a draw, the reality was that I was gradually losing ground, and just like the other players, I was losing much of my interest in this game. By fall 1912, Austria and France were trying to push through a draw without me. I naturally rejected this and re-proposed the 3-power draw. I was making very clear to them that I wouldn't accept any draw that excluded me, and if they tried to keep me out, I would simply do my best to throw the game to one of them. In spring 1913, the third replacement England surrendered. In fall 1913, a 4th replacement England joined, then surrendered, then was replaced, then the 5th replacement England surrendered. To recap, we have now gone through the exact same number of English players as French players. At this point, however, the zombie Turkish player decided to start mouthing off in the public press. It began with him commenting, "Anyone got an explanation why this happens a lot more frequently in this game than in any other?" France agreed and said, "I have never seen it before. Crazy." I said that I disagreed, because unfortunately this had been the pattern in both this games and various others I'd been in. If you remember the diplomacy commentary I did on the game A War of Attrition in August 2022, we had 6 different players sit in the French seat in that one. Similarly, in another recent game I've played, we had 5 different Italian players, and in another game I played, besides the ones I've already mentioned, we had 5 England players. So this is not actually a terribly uncommon pattern in games that I've been in. I would have cited some of these examples, but since this was an anonymous game, I didn't want to give my identity away by naming games that I personally had participated in. The bottom line is that this wasn't all that unusual, it's a much bigger and more noticeable pattern in protected games where the turn resets if a player surrenders, which can create a downward spiral of players repeatedly joining and then surrendering, leading to other players becoming discouraged and surrendering too. It might have seemed uncommon to France and Turkey, who have been in a combined number of ranked games on this site of about 100, but after having participated in over 160 ranked games myself, I had seen a bit more of this. The only reason I mention this stuff is that because I disagreed with him, Turkey devolved into accusing me of having stooges join the game so that I could make it last longer to my benefit, because whenever they surrendered, the deadlines got extended. This was both insulting and a violation of the Play Diplomacy site rules, which instruct that if you suspect cheating of any kind, it is forbidden to make unfounded accusations in the public press, and you should instead inform a moderator on the forum. I told Turkey as much, and he continued to spew his garbage for the remainder of the game. I include this information in my report on the game only because I was very insulted by it, and I'm hoping Turkey will see this and hang his head in shame. I'll probably send it to him myself, frankly. You should be very careful throwing around these kinds of allegations. I have a very good reputation. I've been on this site since 2014. I do not cheat in diplomacy ever. Don't even say that about me as a joke. It sounds silly, but I have a sense of honor, so I will admit perhaps I took this a bit personally. Fortunately, it was too late in the game for these accusations to have any actual effect on the game's outcome. I was already slowly dying anyway. The question now was whether I could throw enough centers to one of my enemies to force the others to stop killing me off and try to reach a 3-power draw that would include me. Unfortunately, as the years passed, neither France nor Austria really bit onto the bait I was throwing out. Austria had the ability to try to secure centers on the other side of the stalemate line, such as Tunis and Munich, but he never really lifted a finger in that direction. As my strength waned, the only center I could really control the distribution of was St. Petersburg, which I gifted to Austria. In fall 1917, a new English player joined the game yet again. Turkey had shut up about it at this point since there was no possible way that my very dead Russian power could benefit from this. At this point, there was a last bit of discussion in the public press. Although I had tried to influence the game by throwing centers to France and Austria, mainly Austria, I hadn't managed to give either of them the solo. However, Austria had made a pretty serious strategic mistake by leaving Tunis under French control and relying on having control of St. Pete for the draw. But St. Pete was a center that France could take, if France really wanted to win. Would France go for the solo here, or would France agree to the draw? And, after keeping us in suspense for a little while, France agreed to the draw. It was a little disappointing for me. I was really hoping to make either France or Austria regret trying this 2-power draw that I felt I could destabilize. If France had gone for the solo, it would have been completely earned, would have vindicated me, and Austria would have earned the loss. But, to the victor go the spoils. If France wanted to reward Austria for his loyalty, that was his prerogative. And that was how the cookie crumbled. I hope you enjoyed this diplomacy commentary. If so, I hope you'll comment with your thoughts and subscribe to this channel, which will promote this video in the YouTube algorithm and help you get more of this content in your YouTube feed. You should also like, because that causes YouTube to promote my videos to you, and I have well over 100 videos like this that you may enjoy. If you really liked this, you should consider joining my patrons and subtitle translators, whose names are now on screen. The patrons in particular have access to exclusive content that other viewers never get to see, including an exclusive diplomacy commentary and a podcast where every episode goes through a season of a diplomacy game. Until next time, Florida Man, out.